We may be low-ranking members of the dark web, but nevertheless, we have a message for mainstream media. Here it is.
Humanity 2101 will not be given.
What happened?
Someone set up us the bomb. We get signal.
What?
Main screen turn on.
It's you.
How are you, gentlemen? All your base are belong to us. You are on the way to destruction.
What you say?
You have no chance to survive, mate, your time. Ha ha ha. All your base, all your base are belong to us.
Early memes. I couldn't help but share that. Now let's get down to business. Hey everyone, I wanted to talk to you about the so-called mainstream media. I got inspiration for this talk from Sargon of Akkad. So, for those of you who don't know, Sargon is a YouTube guy, anti-political correctness. He's also now running for as a member of parliament from the UKIP party in the UK. But the other day he was at a press conference for this. And now, of course, the press hates him because he's a proponent of free speech. So, and when I say press, I mean the so-called mainstream media. And they were kind of executing their usual program of dishonest smear campaign against him. And at a press conference recently, he turned the tables on them. A friend of mine actually pointed this out to me, and I went and checked it out. So, without me explaining, I'll just play the clip really quickly of how Sargon reacted. His name is Carl Benjamin. How Sargon reacted to the press and how he approached the press. And then we'll talk a little bit about why that matters and why that's appropriate.
So what I want you to do is each one of you to do 1 minute on why you're running as an MEP for UKIP. Carl, you go ahead.
Because you guys are severely mismanaging the country. I mean, really, I'm just here to kind of mock the legacy media. Your numbers are going down every day, and our numbers are going up, right? Like combined, the YouTubers are getting like 30 million views a month. You're dying. And it's because do you know what your rating is on Trustpilot, business review site? 84% 1 star for the BBC, 59% 1 star for ITV, and 72% 1 star for Channel 4. I don't care what you say. You are just smear merchants. Not one of you can tell me what I believe. Not one of you knows. But all of the public know because they can go to my YouTube channel, Sargon of Akkad, and just watch for themselves. I've been doing this for 5 years. I have nearly 1 million subscribers. Just go and have a look. I'm not answering your questions. I'm not apologizing for anything. You dirty, dirty smear merchants. Get back.
So that's how he started the press conference. And then when reporters raised their hand or whatever and wanted to ask questions, he would say things like 84% 1 star, yeah, carry on, right? So he was calling them out at what their low ratings were, just to emphasize that no one really pays attention to the so-called mainstream media anymore, which is why I have been thinking about this a little bit, and I wanted to look at it in the United States. Now, we tend to think of, the CNNs and the MSNBCs and the Fox Newses as the kind of mainstream media, right? The big media companies. And we hear often that the kind of more popular YouTube people, such as Sargon, are part of this so-called intellectual dark web, is what we hear. And, I think if we really think about it, the mainstream media is really more, I would call, legacy media. So actually, Eric Weinstein is credited with originally coining this term intellectual dark web. And of course, he was referring to, when he coined this term, he was referring to himself and his colleagues. He he is part of the intellectual dark web, and I think it's a reflection of how he thinks his colleagues are perceived and how he is perceived by the quote mainstream world, right? The mainstream institutions, media, universities, that kind of thing. And he recognizes that he and his colleagues are viewed as kind of this dark and separate and dirty kind of thing. They're toxic, they're radioactive in some way. And, of course, the only requirement really for membership in the dark web is that you don't subscribe to this intersectional ideology that has taken over really mainstream media, universities, a lot of institutions. And so the legacy media loves the term intellectual dark web because it marginalizes everyone who's not them, who wants to be part of a dark web. It sounds sinister. The implication is, of course, that it's something hidden and evil, right? There's something dangerous lurking below the surface of the web, the intellectual dark web. In fact, often for the dark web, they use this image of an iceberg where the tip of the iceberg is the part of the web that we normally use, and the huge portion below the water is the dark web. And so labeling people intellectual dark web implies that they're part of this kind of dark and sinister and dangerous thing, right? You don't want to run into an iceberg because of the dark web below, right? The bottom part of the iceberg is the dangerous part that can sink your ship. And so that's why this term, I think, is really popular, and why the legacy media loves to just label people, everyone from Joe Rogan to Eric Weinstein to Jordan Peterson to even Dave Rubin are all smeared with this term. Even though Eric Weinstein came up with it, it's not a great term. It's a derogatory term, and they are smeared with it by the legacy media. And it's intended to make the rest of us feel like we don't need to listen to these people because they're part of this evil cabal. They're the intellectual dark web. Why have they done this? Really, it's that name marginalizes, obviously, people who aren't in mainstream media, aren't in legacy media. It makes it sound like, oh, we're professionals, we have big buildings and nice suits and space in downtown, right? It's A-level space downtown. You can trust us with your ad dollars, everyone. But those other guys, right, those dark web guys, they're really just one step up from basement-dwelling incels, right? They pay no attention to them. They're fringe. No one listens to them. They have no influence. They're not real media. They're not real journalism. Look, they don't even wear suits and have teleprompters. I mean, look at all the nasty things they say on Twitter. You want to avoid them, right? In fact, they should probably be banned from social media. So that's the kind of narrative that has been spun, and that's why it's been spun, because you got these mainstream media companies and they don't like this competition. And I know some people dismiss that as, what do you mean competition? Like Sargon competes with CNN or whatever, or Channel 4 in the UK, which is one of the stations that was at the press conference the other day. People kind of scoff at that and like, you don't compete with them. They're real companies. You're just internet guy. You don't compete. But yes, you do. So let's take a look. If you look at the total viewership, let's just take a look first at how big the cable news is. These are the top three. So the top three cable news people or channels are Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN. Those are the top three news networks in the U.S. I'm focusing on the U.S. here. So in those top three, if you look at, I found the 2018 total viewers as per Nielsen. So this is in the Nielsen ratings, the total viewers in 2018. So for Fox, the largest one by far, they had 2.48 million viewers. And for MSNBC, they had 1.79 million viewers. They were the second. And the third of the big three is CNN, and they have 986,000 total viewers in 2018, according to Nielsen. So that's what we got on the so-called mainstream, the legacy media. So does this supposed dark web, this intellectual dark web, do they compete with mainstream media? Well, so let's take a look. I just want to be clear that the dark web, I just kind of took some random people. For those of you watching, you've got some, you can see pictures. I tried to choose pictures in which the dark web people look nice and mean, right? They can be vilified by the legacy media. They're all got mean faces on here, with the exception of Carl Benjamin. He's really hard to find him making a nasty face. But anyway, so I tried to find a bunch of evil-looking white dudes for this picture here, and these are all people that have been called by legacy media. They've all been called intellectual dark web at one time or another, and of course there's more people, but these are just a sampling. And so this is Jordan Peterson, from upper left to lower right. It goes Jordan Peterson, Stefan Molyneux, Dave Rubin, Carl Benjamin, who is Sargon of Akkad, Milo Yiannopoulos, and of course Joe Rogan. So, so how do we compare these guys to? Because they don't have Nielsen ratings. How do we compare them to CNN and disprove this idea that they're not competing? Because I think they actually are competing. So how do we compare them? Well, of course, Nielsen doesn't have information about. There's no Nielsen ratings for Jordan Peterson or Stefan Molyneux, but I think the closest thing to compare, maybe the fairest comparison, is YouTube subscribers. Of course, more people watch videos than are subscribers. That's true. But, we'll be generous. We'll be conservative here and say, well, the subscribership maybe is a good metric for viewership as a comparison when we're looking at cable news. And of course, for cable news, too, the number of viewers, there's actually at peak points, there's more views here and there. So probably the Nielsen total viewers and the subscribers on YouTube is a good way to compare, getting closer to apples and apples. It's not exactly apples and apples, but we're getting as close as we can. So if we're talking about influence and we're talking about who's mainstream, let's take a look at this. So what do we have? So here's a list of several prominent, quote, intellectual dark web type people. These are 10 people who the legacy media considers unimportant intellectual dark web fringe people. And this is everyone from, this is Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, Sargon of Akkad, who is Carl Benjamin, Stefan Molyneux, Milo Yiannopoulos, Count Dankula, whose real name is Mark Meechan, Tim Pool, Sam Harris, and Gad Saad. Or Saad, I'm not sure how to say his name. So for each one, some of them are more journalists. Like Tim Pool is straight up a journalist. Right? Joe Rogan, more of just an interviewer, and obviously he's a comedian in his as one of his jobs. But the Joe Rogan podcast really just more interviews. Same with Dave Rubin. Jordan Peterson, obviously a little more commentary and that kind of stuff. Not necessarily news at all. Same with maybe Stefan Molyneux. But so there's a smattering here of different types of people. And if you look, so viewership-wise or subscriber-wise, Joe Rogan is by far the most popular here in this list. He's at 5.17 million YouTube subscribers. Jordan and Peterson is next at 1.97 million. Dave Rubin at 991,000. And it works its way down to the smallest on this list here is Gad, who has 151,000. Now, there's other people in between there. These are just ones that I chose there that are often smeared as intellectual dark web. So that's what we've got. Now, just for those of you who are wondering about where Alex Jones would have fit in because he did lose his YouTube channel, Alex Jones, or the InfoWars YouTube channel, would have been number 2 here on this list. They would have been at 2.4 million. So they would have been in between Jordan and Joe Rogan. So they would have taken over that second slot. So that's what we've got. Now, how do we compare these? People don't like numbers, so I came up with a little way to compare these. I did this 2 ways. So I defined some units of measurement. One is, I call one of them a CNN. A CNN is an audience of 986,000 people, which is CNN's Nielsen data from 2018. So one CNN is 986,000 people. So I used them as the standard, the legacy media standard. and we're going to compare them to the dark web people. And the other standard I brought out is I used the Tim Pool standard. Now, and I called these pools. One pool is 431,480, which was Tim's subscriber count last I checked. So I used him primarily for two primary reasons. One is he's low on the list, so you can't say I'm cherry picking too much. I mean, CNN is the number 3 network. Tim is well below number 3 on the intellectual dark web list. So he's down on the list. He's got fewer subscribers than those Rogans and the Petersons and that kind of people. But he's also more strictly news, so he's a good comparison to a news channel, right? He does a lot less commentary, a lot more news. He does some commentary, but then again, so does CNN. So, so that's what we got. One pool is 431,000, and one CNN is 986,000. So how do they compare to each other? Well, for those of you who are watching, you can see this graph. I asked the question: how many CNNs is each dark web personality worth? Right, and so you can see if you're going to spend your ad dollars on these guys, what would you get in terms of? They're probably actually obviously they're much cheaper, but if you're going to spend ad dollars on some of the intellectual dark web people instead of CNN, what would you expect to see? What kind of reach can you get? Well, if we look at this graph, Joe Rogan is worth 5.2 CNNs. That's a lot, right? So you advertise on Joe Rogan, you're reaching 5.2 times as many people as CNN. Jordan Peterson, you're reaching twice as many, 2.0 people. Dave Rubin is a nice comparison. Dave Rubin is about 1 CNN. So he's almost a straight comparison. So one Dave Rubin is 1 CNN in terms of audience reach. And then it works on down here. If you look at someone like Tim Pool, you're getting a little less than half a CNN. You're getting 0.44 CNNs, which is still pretty impressive considering Tim Pool is one guy with the camera, right? So that's what this looks like, all the way down to Gad, who's 0.15 CNNs. Now, of course, when you ask, like, well, at this press conference, Sargon kind of said, "I don't care what you think to the legacy media. I don't care what you guys think. No one watches you." Well, Sargon can justify that? Look at this. Sargon is 0.96 of a CNN. He's almost CNN himself. Why does he care what Channel 4 in the UK thinks about him? His reach is CNN's, basically. So that kind of attitude starts to make sense. And then we look at, let's switch now and say, we'll ask the reverse question. Instead of how many CNNs is each intellectual dark web person worth, we'll say, well, how many Tim Pools is each of the legacy media worth? And again, I chose Tim because he's one guy with a camera. It's great. He's one guy with a camera doing news. Awesome. Okay, so Fox, the leader in cable news or network news, 5.75 Tim Pools. So Fox could have almost 6 Tim Pools and be just as effective, and that's it. MSNBC, 4.15 Tim Pools, and CNN, 2.29 Tim Pools. So again, one guy with the camera, and not to undermine anything Tim does. He does great work. I love Tim. So he's great. But CNN really only has a little more than twice his reach for the entire freaking network of CNN. So that's what that looks like. Now, we can stare at charts all day about who has more reach and that kind of thing. But I was wondering, not necessarily as a shareholder, but maybe as the long-term investor, how much do these networks spend to get this reach? Because I doubt Tim Pool spends millions of dollars to get his reach, right? So how much do they spend, and what are they getting for their spend? How efficient is the legacy media? Which is something that you might care about if you're an investor and you're thinking about long term where to place your money. So let's take a look at that. So I pulled some data from the Pew Research had some 2017 data on profit and and revenue, and I had to estimate based on splits of revenue from ads versus affiliate fees. So these are estimates, but probably ballpark correct here. Fox News, their costs, their operational costs, are about 1.1. Now remember, all these companies, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, they're all owned by parent companies, so the finances are opaque, which is why this is an estimate here. So Fox News spends probably about $1.1 billion in operational costs. Now, the result of that cost, $1.1 billion with a B, the result of that cost is they get about almost half a Joe Rogan. They get a 0.48 of a Joe Rogan. That's what they get out of that. So that's how that's money spent. I doubt Joe Rogan spends $2 billion. MSNBC spends roughly $779 million. Again, these are estimates. And for that, they get about a little more than one Jordan Peterson. They get about 1.1 Jordan Peterson's worth of reach. Okay? And CNN spends about $429 million is the guesstimate here. And for that money, they get about 99% of a Dave Rubin. So not quite a whole Dave. So Dave's a little bit more influential than CNN, a little more reach. So, again, these numbers are estimates. Even if I'm off by a factor of 5 and CNN only spends less than $100 million, or Fox only spends, even if I'm off by an order of magnitude, Fox only spends, let's say they only spend $100 million, right? Or CNN only spends $42 million. If I'm off by literally an order of magnitude, it's still pretty ridiculous to compare them to Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, and Joe Rogan. So that's what they get for their money. So if you're thinking about investing, you might want to wonder about their efficiency. So if we look here at this big picture, it makes me think, who's really mainstream and who's really dark web? Because what we're told is that CNN is mainstream, and people like Carl Benjamin are the intellectual dark web, and Dave Rubin and Tim Pool, they're the intellectual dark web. CNN is mainstream, but are they? Because it seems like really CNN is just legacy media, and Sargon of Akkad is new media. Or Tim Pool is a better example because he's more straightforward comparison. He's a reporter. Tim Pool is where news is going, not CNN. And so my conclusion here is that this is mainstream. Mainstream are these guys. They're the Jordan Petersons and the Stefan Molyneux and the Dave Rubins and the Sargons and the Milos and the Joe Rogans. Even if you don't like some of these people, these are the mainstream people. And I'm making that claim based on reach. Together, these guys have way more reach than the three networks combined that we just talked about. And those are the three best networks. Those are the three most influential, most powerful networks with the biggest audience. These guys beat them. So the next time you think about writing a check to CNN for ad dollars or something like that, you might want to ask yourself, who really is mainstream, right? I don't think we should concede that network television is mainstream media anymore. That's not what they are. I'm going to start calling them legacy media because they're legacy media. And YouTube is, whether it's YouTube or another platform, these independent guys like Tim Pool, commentators like Stefan Molyneux, they're the new media. That's where media is going. And frankly, they've got more influence. So who cares about Anderson Cooper when you have Dave Rubin? So that's all I wanted to share. My thoughts on mainstream versus legacy media. Please go ahead and like and subscribe to Unsafe Space. You can follow us on YouTube at Unsafe Space, and you can go to unsafespace.com for newsletter. And when we finally get banned, we'll be able to tell you where our stuff is if you sign up for the newsletter there. So thanks again, everyone. And remember, it's not mainstream media, it's legacy media. Make them feel old. They're dinosaurs. They're irrelevant. Let's start talking like that. Let's act like that because that's the truth.